behind the thick stone walls lay a completely different life, governed not by the laws of honor, but by the harsh rules of survival. Every day in the castle was a test that modern man would hardly be able to endure. It was a struggle against cold, hunger, and conditions that we would today call unbearable. Watch this video to the end, and you will find out why the most desirable place in the castle was not the treasury, but the ordinary kitchen, and what simple item of clothing could save the life of its owner. Forget the silence and tranquility of the stone halls we see in museums. The castle was a constantly active organism, a buzzing hive filled with thousands of sounds. From morning to night, you would hear the clang of hammers from the forge, the creaking of carts, the cries of merchants, and the constant hubbub of dozens, if not hundreds, of people living in a confined space. Added to this sonic chaos was a world of smells completely foreign to our sense of smell. Smoke from dozens of hearths mingled with the aromas of food being prepared in huge kitchens. This seemingly pleasant smell was intertwined with the smell of sweat from hundreds of unwashed bodies and the breath of people who did not know toothpaste. The sound environment of the castle was multi-layered and constantly changing. Dawn brought the ringing of bells calling people to prayer. Then the working day began with the shouts of drivers, the barking of dogs, and the mooing of cows in their pens. Blacksmith hammers created a rhythmic metallic background, and the sounds of saws, planes, and looms came from the workshops. Even at night, there was no silence. The snoring of hundreds of sleeping people, the creaking of wooden structures, and the footsteps of the night guard created a constant soundtrack. The olfactory landscape was even more complex. The smoke was not uniform. It carried the aromas of different types of wood, burning straw, and coal. The smells of food being prepared ranged from the appetizing aromas of roasted meat to the sour smells of fermenting dough and sour milk. The strongest impression was the pervasive smell of waste. Sewage systems were primitive, and even in the richest castles, the aromas from the toilets, called garderobes, spread through the corridors. Added to this was the smell from the stables and cattle yards, which were often located inside the fortress walls. The sanitary conditions of the castle created a special olfactory environment that would be unbearable for modern humans. Wardrobes, toilets built into the castle walls, were often located above moats or rivers, but in dry weather, the smells concentrated and spread throughout the building. Waste from hundreds of people and animals created a constant ammonia background, mixed with the smells of rotting food scraps and stagnant water. Medieval people developed selective perception that allowed them to function in such an environment. Their brains automatically filtered out familiar unpleasant odors, focusing on new signals that could carry important information. The smell of smoke from a fire, the aroma of freshly baked bread, or the stench of disease. For us, this would be the first and perhaps the most difficult challenge. Constant noise would interfere with sleep and concentration, and unfamiliar smells would cause physical discomfort. This invisible wall of sounds and smells separates our era from the past much more reliably than centuries. Adapting to such an environment would require a radical restructuring of the nervous system. Modern humans are accustomed to being able to control their environment, to regulate temperature, lighting, and noise levels. In a castle, such control was impossible. You would be forced to accept the environment as it is and learn to function in it. The psychological consequences of such adaptation would be significant. Constant sensory stress could lead to chronic stress, sleep disturbances, and impaired concentration. However, those who managed to adapt would develop unique skills of perception and information filtering unknown to modern humans. What do you think would be the most difficult challenge for you? Constant noise or unfamiliar smells?
It never stops.
The main and often only source of heat was a fireplace or open hearth. However, in huge halls and chambers, their effectiveness was extremely low. Most of the heat simply escaped through the wide chimney along with the smoke, and only those who were in close proximity to the fire could warm themselves. To combat the cold in some way, the walls of the halls were draped with heavy tapestries. They served not only a decorative function. The thick fabric created an air layer that prevented the cold from the stone from penetrating the room. The efficiency of medieval heating was catastrophically low. An open hearth had an efficiency of about 15–20%. The rest of the energy literally flew out the chimney. In a 200 square meter hall with ceilings 8–10 meters high, even a large fireplace could only heat an area with a radius of 2–3 meters. This meant that 90% of the room remained almost as cold as outside. Tapestries functioned as a primitive heating system. The air gap between the fabric and the wall worked on the same principle as modern insulation. The most expensive tapestries were specially woven with pile to increase the amount of air trapped. Sleeping areas were designed to be as protected from drafts as possible. The beds of the nobility were surrounded by heavy canopies made of thick fabric. This created a small enclosed space that could be warmed by the heat of one's own body. Clothing was the main means of individual heating. People wore several layers of wool and fur clothing without taking it off even indoors. Hats and hoods were a mandatory part of the home wardrobe, not only for women, but also for men. The canopy turned the bed into a personal greenhouse. Thick curtains created a volume of about 10–15 cubic meters, which the human body could warm relatively effectively during the night. Breathing and natural body heat raised the temperature inside the canopy by 5–10 degrees compared to the surrounding air. Layering clothing was a scientifically sound strategy. Each layer trapped air, creating an insulating effect. A typical winter outfit might include a linen shirt, a wool tunic, a fur vest, and a cloak. A system that could weigh up to 10 kilograms but ensured survival. Fuel was a valuable resource. Firewood and peat were expensive, and their consumption was strictly controlled. Heating the entire castle around the clock was an unthinkable luxury, so only the most important rooms, such as the lord's chambers and the kitchen, were heated. The usual inhabitants of the castle, servants, craftsmen, soldiers, slept in common barracks or directly in the corridors. They covered themselves with their own cloaks and slept on straw mattresses, trying to keep warm by huddling together. For them, night was the coldest and most unpleasant time of the day. The economics of heating were brutal. The cost of firewood in winter could account for a significant portion of even a wealthy castle's budget. Fuel preparation required the constant labor of dozens of people, cutting, transporting, drying, and storing. A single large fireplace consumed about a cubic meter of firewood per day, which required cutting down several trees. Collective sleeping was not only an economic necessity, but also a survival strategy. A group of 10–15 people sleeping close together could maintain a temperature sufficient to prevent frostbite. This practice required special social organization and rules of conduct. Constant cold was not just uncomfortable, but a serious threat to health. It weakened the body and made it vulnerable to disease. The ability to find and retain heat was one of the key survival skills. Survival in the castle meant constant adaptation to low temperatures. It was necessary to know where to find the warmest place, how to dress properly, and how to use any available source of heat. Without this knowledge, a week in the castle would have turned into an icy ordeal. The medical consequences of living in the cold were serious. Chronic respiratory diseases, arthritis, and frostbite were common. Infant mortality rose sharply in winter precisely because of the inability of small bodies to cope with the constant cold. People developed special skills. They knew how to quickly warm frozen limbs, which herbs helped with colds, and how to recognize the early signs of frostbite. But even if you found a way to warm up, it did not guarantee you a peaceful night. Are you ready to learn why the concept of personal space and privacy was completely foreign to medieval people, and where the inhabitants of the castle actually slept? Every inhabitant of the castle, from the lord to the lowliest stable boy, had a strictly defined place. This place determined not only his duties, but also what food he would receive, where he would sleep, and even with whom he had the right to speak. Violating these unwritten rules could have catastrophic consequences. Social stratification was visible and tangible. Clothing, jewelry, even the way a person walked signaled their status. There were strict rules about who could wear certain colors, fabrics, or jewelry. Purple was the prerogative of the highest nobility, silk was a sign of wealth, and coarse wool indicated low birth. Body language was just as important as words. The degree of bowing, the duration of eye contact, the position of the hands, all of this conveyed information about social status and relationships between people. A mistake in these nonverbal signals could be taken as a serious insult. Relationships in the castle were not based on friendship, but on a system of vassalage and obligations. Everyone served someone and, in turn, had someone under their command. Trust was a rare luxury. Much more often, relationships were based on mutual benefit and fear of punishment. Your survival depended directly on patronage. You had to find someone higher than you on the social ladder and earn their favor. Only then could you count on protection, food, and a roof over your head. The patronage system functioned as a network of mutual obligations. The patron provided protection and sustenance, and in return expected absolute loyalty and a willingness to carry out any task. These relationships were formalized through rituals, oaths of allegiance, initiation ceremonies, symbolic gifts. Finding a patron required strategic thinking and patience. It was necessary to study the influential people in the castle, understand their interests and needs, and find ways to make oneself useful. This could be through certain skills, access to information, or simply the ability to entertain a bored lord. Mistakes were not forgiven. Once you lost your patron's favor, you instantly lost everything. You could simply be thrown out of the gates, which in those days was tantamount to a death sentence, especially in winter. Information was the main currency. The ability to listen, remember, and pass on the necessary information at the right time was highly valued. Rumors and gossip were not just entertainment, but a tool for influence and survival. The castle's intelligence network operated on the basis of servants who had access to their master's private conversations. Maids knew about family problems, cooks knew about guests and their preferences, and grooms knew about travels and plans. This information was sold, exchanged, and used to gain advantages. Bread was the staple food, but it was not the fluffy white bread we are used to. Most people ate coarse, dark bread made from rye or barley, often mixed with bran, which was very dense and hard. The second pillar of the diet was soup, or potage. It was cooked in a huge cauldron throughout the day. Everything that was at hand went into the cauldron: grain, beans, vegetables, and, if you were lucky, small pieces of meat or fat for flavor. Bread made up 70–80% of the daily calorie intake. Its texture was so dense that it often had to be soaked in soup or broth to make it edible. Rye bread had a sour taste due to the natural fermentation of the dough, while barley bread was drier and quickly became stale. Potage was a constantly boiling pot to which new ingredients were added throughout the day. This system made it possible to use any available food as efficiently as possible and to keep hot food for a large number of people at minimum fuel cost. Meat was a luxury available mainly to the nobility and warriors. Ordinary servants and craftsmen saw it on their table only on major holidays. Most often it was salted or dried meat, which had to be soaked and cooked for a long time to make it edible. Fresh vegetables and fruits were also not an everyday food. They were eaten mainly in summer and autumn during the harvest season. In winter, people had to make do with sauerkraut, pickled cucumbers, and dried root vegetables. Canned meat required special cooking skills. Salted meat had to be soaked in several changes of water to remove excess salt, then cooked for a long time until tender. Even after such processing, it remained tough and had a specific taste that modern people would find unpleasant. The lack of vitamin C in the winter diet was a serious problem. Sauerkraut was practically the only source of this vitamin, which explains its importance in the medieval diet. The main drink was not water, but ale or beer. Water from wells and rivers was often unsafe, and the fermentation process killed most bacteria. Ale was low in alcohol, nutritious, and quenched thirst better than plain water. Meal times were strictly regulated. There were usually 2 meals a day, lunch around noon and dinner in the evening. Breakfast as we know it did not exist. In the morning, people might eat a piece of bread and wash it down with ale. Ale contained about 2.4% alcohol and was rich in B vitamins thanks to yeast. Everyone drank it, from children to the elderly, as it was the safest way to consume liquids. Ale production was a continuous process that required the constant attention of brewers.
Can I have more of this?
All food was very salty or spicy. Spices, especially pepper, were used not only for flavor, but also to mask the taste of food that was not always fresh. Salt was the main preservative, allowing meat and fish to be stored for the long winter. The use of spices was not a culinary delicacy, but a necessity. Meat and fish were often on the verge of spoiling, and hot spices helped to mask the onset of decay. Salt was so valuable that it was often used as currency. In the next chapter, you will learn how the castle's inhabitants dealt with the most delicate hygiene issues and why this was so important for survival. The main achievement of medieval sanitary thinking was the wardrobe, or toilet. It was not just a room, but a well-thought-out structure, usually located inside a thick wall. It was a small niche with a stone or wooden seat. All waste fell down a special chute. This chute either led outside at the base of the castle wall or into a moat surrounding the fortress. It was a simple but effective system for removing waste from living quarters. However, closets were not available to everyone. They were a privilege of the nobility and were located in their chambers. Ordinary inhabitants of the castle used chamber pots or cesspools located in the courtyard. The contents of the chamber pots were emptied by servants into the same ditches or into specially designated areas. This required daily and not very pleasant work, but it was vital for maintaining order. The castle courtyard was not a place for walking, but a working area where hygiene was subordinate to practicality. Water for drinking and cooking was taken from a well located inside the castle walls. They tried to dig it as far away as possible from places where waste accumulated to avoid contamination. The cleanliness of the well was a matter of strategic importance, especially during a siege. Despite these measures, it was impossible to completely avoid unpleasant odors and unsanitary conditions. People in the Middle Ages were much more relaxed about this than we are. They understood the importance of cleanliness, but their standards were very different from ours. Herbs and incense were used to combat unpleasant odors in living quarters. Floors were sprinkled with fresh straw or fragrant plants such as mint or lavender. This not only helped to freshen the air, but also provided an extra layer of insulation from the cold stone floor. How important do you think your usual sanitation system is to you? In the next chapter, we will find out what people in the castle actually did from dawn to dusk.
Pull, you two, pull!
Life in a medieval castle was subject to a strict routine dictated by two factors: the sun and work. The concept of free time, as we understand it today, was practically non-existent. Every day was filled with the labor necessary to maintain the functioning of this complex system. The day began with the first rays of the sun. Artificial lighting was expensive, so the entire daylight hours had to be used as efficiently as possible. After a short and simple breakfast, all the inhabitants of the castle, from the lord to the servants, set about their duties. For men, the main work was military training or craftsmanship. The soldiers of the garrison practiced weaponry daily, stood guard on the walls, and monitored the condition of the defensive structures. Craftsmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, Gunsmiths worked in their workshops from morning till night. Women were responsible for running the huge household. They prepared food, cleaned the premises, washed clothes, spun wool, and wove cloth. Work in the kitchen began long before dawn and ended late in the evening, as hundreds of people had to be fed. Even the nobility had their days scheduled down to the hour. The lord managed his lands, received vassals, administered justice, and planned military campaigns. His wife supervised the servants, controlled food supplies, and raised the heirs. Short breaks were taken only for meals. Lunch was the main break in the working day, after which work continued until sunset. After dinner, there was very little time left before bedtime, which people spent in the common room listening to a storyteller or playing simple games. The concept of a day off on Sunday did not exist for most servants and craftsmen. Work stopped only for the duration of church services. Only the most important religious holidays provided an opportunity to take a break from the daily routine. Survival in the castle meant accepting this continuous cycle of labor. You would have to find your place in this system and perform your function every day without expecting rewards or free time. This was the price for the food, shelter, and protection that the castle walls provided. As the sun set, life in the castle changed dramatically. If the day was a time of noise and bustling activity, the night plunged the castle into a thick, almost palpable darkness and silence. In an era without electricity, the onset of night meant the end of active life. The main sources of artificial light were candles and torches. However, they were an expensive luxury and were used sparingly. Wax candles, which gave off an even and bright light, were only available to the wealthiest inhabitants of the castle. Most people were content with tallow candles or simple splinters. Tallow candles burned unevenly, smoked heavily, and emitted an unpleasant odor. Splinters, thin long pieces of dry wood, provided very little light and burned quickly, requiring constant replacement. Due to the high cost and fire hazard, only the most important posts where guards were on duty were illuminated. The rest of the castle was plunged into darkness. The inhabitants of the castle navigated this darkness perfectly, knowing every turn and every step. Life, completely subject to the solar cycle, shaped a different perception of time. People made the most of daylight hours and ceased all activity when darkness fell. Night was a time for sleep and rest before a new working day. Survival in the castle required the ability to exist in conditions of limited visibility. It was necessary to learn to appreciate every source of light and not be afraid of the dark. It was a world where shadow was as natural an element as sunlight. Life in a castle shaped a special mentality that can be called the psychology of the fortress. Constantly being behind thick stone walls influenced people's worldview and behavior. It was a world clearly divided into inside and outside. On the one hand, the walls provided a sense of security. In an era of constant wars and raids, the castle was an island of safety and stability. Its inhabitants knew that as long as the gates were closed and guards stood on the walls, they were safe from most threats. This sense of security allowed them to lead a measured life. Craftsmen could work in peace, and peasants from the surrounding villages could take refuge behind the walls in case of danger. The castle was the center of life for the entire region. On the other hand, this isolation created a feeling of confinement. People could go months without leaving the fortress. The world outside the walls seemed distant and full of danger. This fostered a strong sense of community, of us and them. All the inhabitants of the castle were part of one large family or team, dependent on each other. Any stranger who appeared at the gates was viewed with suspicion and caution. The constant presence of soldiers and weapons was commonplace. The clanking of armor and the changing of the guard were as much a part of everyday life as birdsong. The threat of attack was always real, and everyone was prepared for it. This duality, a sense of security and, at the same time, a feeling of being trapped, was the main feature of life in the castle. People paid for protection and stability with their freedom. It was a conscious choice that seemed to be the only right one at the time. Survival in the castle required accepting this psychology. It was necessary to learn to value safety over freedom and to see the walls not as a barrier, but as protection. Without this inner humility, life in the fortress would have turned into imprisonment. The struggle against the cold, monotonous food, lack of privacy, and a strict social hierarchy are just some of the challenges that a modern person would face. Survival in those conditions depended not so much on physical strength as on the ability to accept other people's rules and give up familiar comforts. Perhaps after reading this story, we will begin to appreciate more the simple things that surround us. A warm bed, a hot shower, a variety of food, and of course, the right to personal space. These are luxuries that the inhabitants of medieval castles could not even dream of. What aspect of life in a castle do you think would be the most difficult for you? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new exciting journeys into the past.